Okay, welcome everybody to Garden Gates Talk and Tour. Today I'm talking to Seattle landscape designer Lisa Bauer. She's been designing landscapes there for 12 or 13 years, and we were lucky enough to visit her garden in 2019. So I thought we would talk with her about her yard and her garden, and it's a beautiful place. We profiled it in issue 156. If you have this issue of Garden Gate, you can check it out. Otherwise, you can just walk through the tour with us here. And maybe Lisa, we could just you could give us an idea of what your garden situation is, like the light and the soil kind of thing, and how long you've been gardening there.
Definitely. So we moved into this house and basically raised it in 2000. And then in 2003, we had the hardscapes put in and some of the bones plants. And so luckily we're on sand here. And so it was pretty not very amended when we moved in, but when we started the garden, we just brought a whole bunch of compost in. So, and we've been putting compost in, almost every year to every other year since then. So it's really good soil and great drainage, which I much rather have sand than clay or glacial till, which is what we have a lot of in Seattle.
I hear you there.
So, and we're in a residential neighborhood in Seattle, Northeast Seattle. It's not a super busy street, but it's, we have traffic and definitely a lot of walkers. And
yeah, I know when we drove up to the yard, I was like, I think this is the place. I could just tell you had the best garden on the street.
You can tell there are a lot of plants in my yard.
Yes, sure. But that's fun. And you have, it's sort of an average sized lot, it seems like, for the area. And so it's not super big, but you've got a lot in there.
Yes. And it's a challenge to try to make a small garden, interesting and, feel like it's, a special place. We also have a lot of trees actually around. I didn't mention on the other side of the street, there's like probably 6 over 100-foot Doug firs, and so they drop a lot of needles, and we actually have quite a bit of shade. And because of course I love plants and I've bought so many trees just myself, the garden is becoming more and more of a shade garden. Even though I've got manzanitas here in this first picture. They're doing okay.
Well, yeah, one of the cool things I noticed when we drove up, which it doesn't show is as much in maybe the first photo, but then you had these really cool hedges in that are up near the front, but they're not like your typical hedges where it just surrounds the property line. Can you talk a little bit about those and how you came to put them there and why you put them in the position that they are?
Definitely. Well, I think that especially in a front yard, my philosophy is definitely to sort of set the house off and to really create some curb appeal. And so my way of doing that in an urban setting where spaces are really tight is to take plants and create architecture with your plants in the landscape. And to me, that sort of brings the house, like marries it to the landscape. And so I really like perimeter hedges. They don't have to be really large. It's just sort of like bringing in something that's sort of clippable that can create lines and kind of be a buffer to the outside world. So there's a small boxwood. It's set against the sidewalk on part of the property, and then it's jogged back on two other sides of the property. So that allows for kind of an interesting line, not just a straight line all across the front, but sort of a jogged line. And so within those little spaces, you can, make those little interesting spaces for people who are walking by your yard, and you can plant really cool ground covers, put a lot of color there, maybe do some perennials in those spaces. And then so behind that, the first hedge, which is, I think it's about 2 feet tall now. It's dwarf English boxwood. There's another hedge that I started not too long ago, probably about 3 years ago, but it's a yew hedge. It's a Hicks yew. And that hedge is stepped back about, I would say almost 4 to 5 feet. Beyond the shorter hedge. And so that creates a good pocket where you can plant a lot of really fun things that, come up in the spring and summer. It also hides perennial dead foliage when you don't want to see it. So like a big pet peeve of mine is the tulips, like I love tulips and I love bulbs, but when they die back, they're pretty ugly to look at, especially the foliage takes a long time for it to die back. So it can just be behind the hedge, the smaller hedge, and, you know,
Nice.
die
Yeah.
slowly and nobody cares about it.
Yeah,
So,
good idea. Because you've got, looks like we've got the Blackmondo grass and the heather. I think that was firefly. Is that right? Or heath? I always get the two confused.
oh yeah,
In the
yes.
in the front part of the short. Yeah.
Yep, there's the Blackmondo grass, and then that one's Kaluna. So Kalunas are Heath's melting chocolate or winter chocolate, which is
Oh,
what a
okay.
great marketing name.
Yes. No kidding. I would buy it just for the name.
um,
Cool. Well, then, as seems like, I think as we followed the path was really cool. I like that how you zigzagged that, and it was so interesting. Another piece of interest and surprise for your yard. How did you come up with the zigzag idea? And also, if you can talk a little bit about its size and
yeah,
placement.
I had at the time that we moved into the house, I had a newborn and an 18-month-old, and so I hired a landscape designer to put that pathway in because I had the contractor had put a pathway in, but it was all wrong for the house. It was very curvy and sort of traditional, but it didn't really fit the architecture of the house.
Mhm.
So that is the point where I realized, wow, it's really important to get professional help when you just can't do the job, or you just don't know what to do. And at that time, I had no training. So she just did a lovely job getting that path in. But what I really learned from her philosophy is that the slower you can get to your front door, the better. And what it does is it sort of causes you, when you have to jog left and right, just causes you to sort of slow down and notice the plants. And it makes the journey a little bit longer, but a little bit sort of more pleasant too.
Mhm.
So, and then also in that way too, as you come in from the sidewalk, there's a stop, and I put a strawberry tree right there. And that not only creates a block for our privacy, but it's also, quite a nice little enticement to come in because it's a
Mhm.
really pretty tree, and we have lots of birds in it. So, when you have stops like that, then you can put a focal plant. So that's
Sure.
another
Great.
reason
And
for
then
doing that.
as you take that little journey, you get up to your front porch, which I think when we talked about the story initially, you said you think about porches as kind of like a waiting room. And I thought that was a fun analogy. And maybe you can share with us how you chose the colors for the porch, and just a little bit about the containers as well, because there's some really nice looking containers there, I think.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, when we built the house, I've always had a preference for warm colors. And I think it's because I grew up living in Seattle and it's very dark gray for a lot
Yes.
of the year. So
Mhm.
just by virtue of having to survive in this dark climate, I tend
Mhm.
to pick a warm palette for the inside of my house too, is all based on yellows. So, and I also wanted a dark color for the plants to show up. So I went with a dark green on the bottom and then a slightly lighter green on top. And then down the middle of the house, we did this sort of mustard yellow. And it reads a little bit orange here, but
Mhm.
it's kind of like a mustardy, earthy yellow.
Mhm.
Um, and then I really did want a fun door too. So I just, red goes really well with yellow. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
I popped that red door in there. It's supposed to be good luck and all of
Oh,
that.
yeah. Of course.
So, and
Mhm.
in my palette too, my plant palette too, there's mostly oranges, yellows, and reds, and a lot of white flowers because I love white flowers.
Mhm.
But there's not a ton of pink or purple. And I
Sure.
think just because I'm just naturally drawn toward those sort of warm colors.
Yeah, that makes sense. I
Yeah.
think, and I seem to remember on the porch you had some really neat containers, and well, I can't remember what they were made of. They were very, very modern and sleek, and you had them positioned really well too, so that it kind of made it into a little room, adding to that waiting room feel.
Yeah. They're made, a company called Pot Inc. out of Canada makes them, and they're powder coated aluminum. So they weigh almost nothing. They would be great for like a deck if you had, wanted really big pots.
Hmm.
They weigh, I mean, you can pick it up with one hand. I could pick them up and move them around. They just have a beautiful finish on them too. They're very, very nice.
Yeah.
And they're super clean, just like straight cylinders, straight squares with a
Mhm.
with a rolled edge. Uh, So yeah, I really think that as many rooms as you can make in your yard, especially in a small garden, and people are always perplexed about that. How do I room off a small garden? And my garden is like I think 3,400 square feet if I take the house out of it. And so every time you come through a threshold, like as you enter my garden, there's the portal between the hedges, and then it opens up into this lawn space, and that's one room. But then as you go toward the door, you can see there's a constriction again. And I brought the bed across the front of the house so that, and put a big tree right there. And so that actually creates another space. And so there's a landing pad there because I feel like, every inch counts. And
Yeah.
so we sit out there, and when our friends come to, especially during COVID, we've just had little, short meetings with our neighbors and our friends that come to visit, and
Oh, yeah.
use that. And it's just kind of a way to pause. I think it's nice to have a little bit of space in front of your doorway so people can sort of gather themselves before they
Oh,
come
yeah.
in.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally. And then I think if you go to the left, I think if I remember correctly, if you go to the left, you
Uh-huh.
have this beautiful fountain in a circular, kind of like a little patio, but I think it's also where two paths come together. But I thought that was really cool that you, instead of just joining them, it was a circle. So
Mhm.
how did you come up with, what made you think of the circle? And
Yeah. Well, I love strong forms. And so and I love fire pits, and I love water features. And so here, I mean, the space just sort of called out for a circle. And so,
Mhm.
and my husband actually really wanted one of these basalt pillars. They were very popular at the time,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he handpicked this basalt pillar out. So it just was, it was round. And so I really feel like if you've got a theme going, you just keep increasing the importance of that theme with the same theme. And so, these concentric circles um, kind of came about. And the contractor actually was the one who said, why don't we just make this into a huge path? Because he wanted a really big reservoir so that we wouldn't have to keep filling it up during the summertime.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, that whole outer ring where the white crushed granite is a reservoir underneath.
Oh, wow, that's really
So
good. Yeah.
yes, it's pretty big. We don't have to fill it very often, but yeah. And so yeah, it makes a really good focal point, not only from our kitchen, which is just to the left of that slide,
Mhm.
but it just works really well. It's on access to that patio that's in the front at the front door, and
Oh, yeah.
that another path goes straight back toward the other side of the house. So
Mhm.
I
Cool.
really like formal layouts. I just feel like even if it's done in a kind of fresh modern way, I mean,
Mhm.
just the whole idea of putting things on axis, it really sort of grounds things, and it makes things feel really permanent and calm.
Yeah. Can you explain a little bit what you mean by on axis, just in case somebody doesn't know?
Yeah. So if you take a straight line from this water feature, and you draw a straight line from the center of that and go directly south, it will go through the pathways that are there. And at the other end of it, on axis, so on that straight line, I put another little pot underneath a hydrangea. So
Mhm.
I didn't really even think about that at the time, but I thought, you know what? Every time you turn a corner, it's really nice to see at the end of where you're going something to walk toward,
Oh,
and
yeah.
something that's significant, just to kind of like encourage you to go down there.
Yeah,
So
sure. It draws you along the path there and
yeah.
to see
And
what.
there's lots of that in my yard as far as just I use French doors. If there's any kind of view out from inside the house out, I
Mhm.
will like a lot of times just draw a line, and then whatever's out there through the double doors or through the window, it's really nice to have some kind of a focal point or something to anchor that view.
Nice. Yeah. Well, that fountain, I can see how that fountain would really do that.
Yeah.
Well, another thing I really noticed is that you have a lot of evergreen shrubs and plants in your garden. And, going back to what you said about a gray climate, I'm sure winter in Seattle is pretty gray as well, not just in the Midwest where I am, but how do you, I think you had sort of a rule of thumb, it seems like, about having
Yeah.
evergreens and evergreen perennials, even for you, especially evergreen perennials and shrubs.
Yes. Well, whenever I design a yard, I always I I always use at least, I would say 2/3 to 3/4 evergreen to deciduous. So whether that's an evergreen tree or a shrub or on down the line, small shrub to large ground cover to the very tightest ground cover,
Mhm.
just 3/4 to 2/3. And that's just so that it looks good all year round.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, and then you can always plug in, perennials or ephemeral things that come and go,
Mhm.
but it'll just sort of make the garden feel great. And so that kind of like really um, segues into the whole idea of foliage is to me more important than flowers. And I
Mm.
love flowers. I think everybody does, but
Mhm.
really I pick my plants for the foliage first
Oh, okay.
because they're taking up so much room in the garden,
Mhm.
those evergreens. But even in deciduous plants, I really want to think about leaf texture and what's next to each other. It's not just the plant, buying the individual plant, but what pairings of plants look good together.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense. Do you have
So,
are there certain shapes and, I guess, shapes, textures that really kind of are sort of, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Like sure things, sure bets for
sure
putting
bets.
together?
Well, definitely, I definitely like some grasses in a garden. And I was trying to think, of, well, why do I love the grasses so much? And it's great to have some low grasses. Number one, because they can sort of soften the edge of pathways. And I think to use ground covers on really close to a pathway edge is great for softening it because I tend to go really hard and bold with the hardscape shapes. And whenever I show a client that too, they'll go, "Oh, this is so literally geometric and it's so harsh." And then I'll throw the planting plan on top of it and they can immediately see how it's softened. So I love grasses because they look great on a pathway edge and also they add movement
Mhm.
and they're very fine textured. They're probably the most finest texture you can find in your garden, really. But I also like ferns and I like some of the bolder shapes. I love hardy tropical, which I have in my background.
Yeah.
um, because I had visited Hawaii when I was pretty young, and I remember just being blown away and thinking, this feels so good to me. I would love to live in a tropical garden. And so that
Yeah.
has sort of stayed with me my whole life.
Sure.
So again, big foliage. So I love going down to the very minute grasses and then the giant leaves of a gunnera or a banana plant are great. But really the contrast for sure, just creating that contrast and in color too, like using dark green as a background is great. And then you can put some variegated things in front of it.
Mhm.
Not too much variegation, but a little is good.
Yeah. Cool.
Um,
Well, that is excellent. That is very helpful. I think now maybe we could move along to your backyard because that path kind of leads to the back. Oh,
okay,
and no, well, we better go to the backyard because we'll run out of time.
okay. Let's go to the backyard.
And then
Okay,
your
so
patio, I think that's kind of what one of the first things you see is the patio back there. And I think it goes like between your house and your garage. And what were you thinking, or how were you thinking of using your patio? What were kind of the things you wanted from that space?
yeah, it's not a really wide space, and we knew that we wanted a water feature that was against the garage, so opposite these double French doors. That's our dining room, and our kitchen's just beyond that, and our living room is just to the left. And so the views out this side of the house are pretty important. So, and also our garage, we had to get to our garage. So I just kind of knew that this would be our kind of outdoor eating area. And it's just really sandwiched between the house and the garage, but this deck was perfect. And I didn't want it to be too high because a lot of people come out, they want to come straight out from their living spaces and go right onto their deck for eating. But I felt like if I could sink it down a little bit, then you're not in everybody's view and you just feel a little cozier. So I really like the idea of creating a big enough landing that you can stop and sort of gather yourself so you don't fall down the stairs and then make your way down to the deck. And so that's why that deck is also down, let's see, 1, 2, 3 rises. And then the water features just opposite that. And then our garage door goes off to the the north side.
Oh, yeah.
So, but yeah, it makes a really cozy living area. And to me, the sound of water too is just the best. I mean, it just sort of drowns out any city noise you have or
Mhm.
neighbor noise. And then was working with this architect to create this water feature, and I knew I wanted it to have a seat edge on it. So,
Mhm.
and I knew I wanted it to have a spillover too. So we sort of came up with this design that's used for seating and for enjoying.
Oh, yeah, nice. And
Yeah.
there's a special piece of artwork there on the wall, isn't there?
Yes. And so that my father, he passed away 23 years ago, but I did get to inherit this piece. And at the time I didn't know what I would do with it, but like it came pretty quick. I was like, okay, I want to put that over the fountain because we had nothing there. And that is on axis with those French doors that go into our dining room area.
Yeah, that's so
So
cool.
yeah, and it's uplit from the fountain so we can see it at night. So that's another thing I think that's really helpful in the landscape is to, if you can have some night lighting, it will completely expand your living area at night
Oh,
because you can
cool.
look out your window and you can see your garden. Otherwise, it's just black and you can't see anything. So it really increases the whole enjoyment of all the work that you do in your garden all day.
Yeah.
So um,
I
yeah, so we really enjoy that
I
piece.
kind of remember too, you talking about when we first talked about your garden, you talking about like having a balance between people, places, and places. And that was always like the challenge, especially for plant nerds like us, but for everybody too. But do you have any kind of a, like, how do you work that through and figure out what's the best balance for that?
That is such a good question. And I've been talking about that a lot lately to people. I really think that I run into a lot of gardens where the hardscape is as big as people, I mean, just too big. And
Mhm.
the hardscapes are up against fences. So you have hardscape on hardscape. And what I really believe, even in a small garden, is make your hardscape as small as you need it, as you want to have the function first, but figure out what those minimum dimensions are and just go a little bit past it, but don't think more is better with hardscape. Because if you don't leave enough room for a garden bed, and kind of my minimum would be 4 feet wide, 4 feet deep, then you're not going to be able to get the plant layers in there.
Oh,
And if you can't get the plant layers in there, then you can't soften it and it won't feel like a garden.
mm,
So
yeah.
I say, yeah, leave as much planting bed space as possible and also float your people spaces inside the plant beds. So if you can surround your people's living spaces, like on all sides almost,
Uh-huh.
with garden beds, then you can really feel like you're living in it. And I
Yeah.
think people are so much happier that way. And
Mhm.
getting your plants up high too. Like if you're on a patio, I see a lot of patios that are right up against, surrounded by lawn, and there's no planting beds around, and
Mhm.
maybe it's a couple little pots. But really, if you can get carve out planting beds around your patio or your dining area, and then get the plants up big enough so that when you're sitting, they're right in your view. I think that's the best feeling.
Oh,
In
yeah.
my garden's a completely, it's even more than that. But in a small garden, I think it's even more important to get the plants to be tall. And it's because it obscures all of the perimeter.
Sure. Yeah, it kind of makes it a little harder to tell where the end of the garden is and maybe gives you a little bit feeling of more space and
Exactly, exactly.
yeah.
So I think if you also leave areas of like lawn is really great for a resting space for your eyes. So if you can leave patches of lawn, doesn't have to be big. And then tight ground covers also will sort of give you some relief. But
Mhm.
then don't be afraid to grow your trees and your shrubs up tall and then arborize them so that you can plant
Mm, yeah.
more interesting things sort of at ground level and then at eye level.
Mhm. So by
So
arborized, you mean maybe limb them up a little bit or?
correct. Yep.
Mhm.
Just take some pruning classes or read a little bit about pruning online so you do a really good job
Yeah.
and just kind of limb up your plants and then you get to put more in. So my garden is completely limbed up. That's
Yeah.
always my agenda is to like, okay, I can arborize this plant when it grows older. And a lot of gardens too, if you do that, your garden will sort of grow with you and
Mhm.
the bases of those big shrubs won't just keep getting bigger and bigger. You can kind of get some space underneath and put some smaller scale things in so that things like grow elegantly and
Oh, yeah.
don't just clobber the ground.
Well, I think, is that your garden behind you?
It is. That is a picture of my garden that I think I'm not sure if that was maybe around the same time that you were
We
here,
came
although
in.
I don't see the lilies back there.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is sort of my dream. When we moved into this house, I told my husband, I really, of course, I wanted to try to do some hardy tropicals in the backyard.
Mhm.
And he was all for it. We had visited a friend who's an artist who has an amazing hardy tropical garden. And Seattle, we can definitely, do palm trees, certain types of palm trees. There's only
Sure.
two that really grow well here,
Mhm.
but yeah, my husband was all excited for it. And so yeah, it's packed with sort of big leaf things and
Yeah.
got a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
specimens too.
Yes. Well, yeah, if you can look in there's a photo of that you can kind of look down the water feature and then see the edge of the patio, and you can see sort of your first step and the lilies blooming, and your first step off the deck and into the yard. And it shows I think layering was something that you kind of briefly mentioned that that you use in your beds there, and with maybe ground covers at the bottom. But then how else do you have any ideas about, combining plants into layers and what that might, how somebody might approach that?
Definitely. So it is really a full garden, but really it's so if you look at the trees, those are the bones, and
Mhm.
there's a tree there that's next to a pot with a yellow
Oh, yeah.
flower in it, and
Mhm.
that tree is called a Franklinia, ex Wardonia, and it's evergreen and it flowers late, and it's next to a deciduous tree. So there we've got the deciduous and the evergreen. But that tree is really bones for all year. And then behind that, there's another deciduous tree. It's so hard to break them apart. And then
Yeah.
there's a hardy Schefflera that's sort of underneath that taller one in the back.
Mhm.
So that one's evergreen. So there's just a really good mix of evergreen
Oh,
and
yeah.
deciduous. The palm tree is evergreen, and then you can see underneath it, I have some things on the ground there. It's hard to see underneath that palm tree, but there's some really tall ferns, and then there's some hardy orchids under there that are hard to see from here. But
Yeah.
I usually put the little stuff, in the front of the border, and then
Mhm.
try to fill in the back with some bigger things.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
uh,
there's another shot too, a couple that has that. Oh, now I can't remember what it is, but it's that big sort of, it's
oh, the round.
the big round foliage, and then you can see I think it was a chorus and Hakanakloa. It's looking back up the path from that raised bed area. There.
Oh, okay. So is this in the back then,
Yeah.
Sherry, like where the metal container is? Or
Yes, if you're
okay,
looking back, like with your back to that.
okay.
Um,
Let me get there. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. That's Petasites. And so that's a really good fun perennial that does disappear during
mhm.
the winter time. It's actually blooming now. And the flowers are incredible. They look like little Martians coming out of the ground. Um, but a chorus grass there, on the lawn edge, it's that
Mhm.
little yellow thing peeking over the edging.
Yeah.
That's there all year round. And then just beyond it, going a little further, there's a dark green shiny leaf thing. That's
Mhm.
Beesia deltophila. That's there all year round. It blooms multiple times.
Mhm.
Um, Underneath the big petasites with the big round leaves under the bananas is hosta, which is
Yeah,
again a perennial that grows most places in this country, which is it's a
sure.
great perennial. Um, and then the bananas, they do die back, and I wrap them. It's the only thing in my garden I really have to kind of pamper, but
Mhm.
they will live. It just, they will die. They will melt to the ground if it freezes, and it does freeze a lot in Seattle. So
Mhm.
I just wrap them so that they have a higher starting point when they start to grow in the summer. In the
Oh,
spring, they'll just start from the
what do
top
you
of
wrap them with?
bubble wrap.
Oh,
So I put
really?
bubble wrap around them, and then I put burlap, and I actually put some faces on them because they become our winter focal point. We put Christmas lights at the base, and anyway, and they change every year because we cut them off at different heights. So it's sort of like this, working sort of performance art piece that happens every year. I take another photograph, and they're all different shapes and sizes depending
Oh,
on
that's fun.
what we're keeping and what we're not keeping. Um, But yeah, there's just lots of layers in there. And, I always tell people too that really make sure that you site your woody plants and your big trees and shrubs, site them with a ruler. Make sure you have a tape measure and go to the center of it and know what the mature growth rate of that is, and plant those with intention, because you can't move those later. So all of my big woody plants I really figured out where they should be over the long term.
Mhm.
But then all of this stuff that I fill in underneath, that's even the pedicites with the big leaves,
Mhm.
that runs a little bit. So I'm always kind of taking some out and I can transplant and put it somewhere else, but everything else can really be moved. So if you're kind of like me and you want to try new things, and you're going to experiment with making another ribbon of, Iconocloa someplace, then the little things, definitely, that's your fun area to play with. So all those ground covers and everything underneath those big shrubs and trees is the experimental place.
Yeah, that makes
I
sense.
say, yeah, you don't have to be so careful about what you do down
Oh,
there.
yeah, for sure.
I do believe in ribbons of things though, because
Okay.
I have such a collector's garden, and a lot of my clients love to buy plants. And so sometimes they have a lot of existing things. And so one way to contain them, to contain the plants, is to put edges of one ground cover like along a certain bed edge. And that will sort of make things feel more calm. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
I always do that in my own garden, just so it feels sane. Otherwise, I mean, I like being in a jungle, but it just sort of unifies things a little bit.
Sure. That makes total sense. So
Okay.
then, okay, so then when you turn around from that area we were just looking at, there's your big raised bed area that's kind of
Okay.
sunken a little bit. And that was a really neat area. There's, you can sit, you can enjoy all the beautiful plants. How did that area come about?
That's a great question. And we didn't develop it for a while. It was just a lower area in the garden. And so we stepped it down to make it level, just so we could utilize the space better. And then that raised bed around the edge was created, and it just was this oval shape. And so we originally had a low kind of edging around the bottom. And everybody that would walk into the space thought, oh, that's a fire pit. When are you
Oh,
going to put the actual fire pit in there? But it was a really big space, because that space is about 7 feet long.
oh,
So
yeah.
in any case, we have a fire pit somewhere else. So I just wanted more planting space, of course.
Yeah.
My husband used to also have this as our vegetable garden area. And sadly, I kept putting more plants in there, and they kind of got choked out. So it became more tropical garden space for Lisa. So at one point I realized I needed to, this was just the perfect focal area from our living room. So we have a big long bank of windows, and just, of course, again, off on axis through those windows, there's this oval. And so I knew that I wanted to get a focal piece in there, and that was in the shape of a gigantic planter. And I really do tell people, the bigger planter you can have and the biggest planter you can afford, you should get it. So this one's like 7 by, I think, 4 wide. But it was, kind of in line with, you can't see it in this photograph, but there's a big arbor in the back, a chunky arbor with a double gate.
Yes.
And then, yeah, fencing on both sides to enclose it. And so just within this planter, I put the focal plant is this Boudia palm, which it has sort of a little bit of a blue cast to it and a lot of light. It's a real specialty palm. And I feel so lucky that I have it and that it's doing fine there.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, on an arbor, on the top of the arbor, I put these birdhouses that I had created for this garden show. And I kind of thought, well, maybe that's too much. Maybe I'm just like building this up too much. But I really do feel like if you're going to have a focal point, and I think every garden should have many, build it up, just go for it, try it out. And I was thinking, okay, maybe I can take them down if it's just too much, but I actually like it because it
Oh, yeah.
kind of brings the flower colors up, and it
Mhm.
brings your eye up into the sky. It just makes it that more dramatic.
Mhm. Now,
So
do you plant it differently every year, or is it pretty much like that?
good question. And I do kind of plant it because, of course, people give me plants, and I'll just try, like, that's an Eryngium agavifolium that's in there. It's the spiky plant. It looks like it has a V in it. It has little blooms, remnants left on there. But anyway, so that was a plant that somebody gave me. And so I do use this as, if I have any space, I will, try something that's kind of exotic looking in there. I do plant coleus. If we have a hard freeze and the coleus don't make it, which they usually don't, those are those orange plants. I usually put perennials, those back in. And then there's the sweet potato vine too, which I'll use that or something else. Those trailers are all considered annuals. I use abutilon, which is flowering maple, and those are wintering over now in Seattle. There are just more and more hardy varieties that they used to just be annuals, but now they're pretty much perennial. We just had a hard, a freeze and a 15 inches of snow, and they're still there.
Oh, wow.
So those I try to keep in there. And then if the cannas don't make it, I will replant them, but sometimes they will come again the next year.
Nice.
But yeah, anything that looks tropical, I put in here. Last year I did put pineapple sage in, it just died after our snow, but I mean, that's a great plant.
Yeah.
Also for hummingbirds. And so, yeah, I think this bed tends to change a lot more, I would say.
I forgot, what zone are you guys there?
We're like zone 7B, but it can really vary too. I feel like some parts of Seattle, I almost feel like it's a zone 8 where I am. But we have pockets for sure that have more, some people have more wind or they're more exposed because we have a lot of hills.
Yeah.
So yeah, usually 7 to 8 in there someplace, but.
Yeah, it seems like your yard it felt sort of protected and it felt cozy.
Yeah. Thank you. That's my aim for sure. Yeah, this is definitely I wanted it to be the sort of showstopper. So I even do echeverias in here.
Oh yeah.
So I get some of those tropical California succulents, and they look great too. And sometimes they winter over and other times they don't. And that's okay, because most of the rest of my garden is just a lot of perennials. So,
well, I know when we talked, when I was there, we were kind of going on a little plant safari because we both love plants. What are maybe a few of your favorites that you have there in the yard? If it's possible to pick.
Good point. That's hard to pick. Well, I've been into gardenias for the last couple of years because I've been trialing them, because I didn't used to be so into fragrant plants, but the older I get, the more I really like the subtleties of fragrant plants. And so I think that the best one for my area is Gardenia Climbs Hardy, which is at my front door. I also have Gardenia Double Mint in the back, but the Climbs Hardy tends to profusely bloom. It just keeps going all, summer through kind of, fall time. Yeah. So I love that plant. It's a little bit of a maintenance thing. It looks a little funny sometimes. You have to pick off the blooms and fertilize it a little here and there. But I like that one. And I also like another plant called Prostanthera cuneata, which is not so well known. It's alpine bush mint. And that one has the foliage is fragrance. So you can just run your hand along it, and it's right by my car door. And so I have several out on the parking strip, and it's just great because I just get a good hit of mint every time I get in my car. It always looks good. Yeah, it's evergreen also. Love it.
Nice.
But there's a lot of them though. So I
know be here all day.
Yeah. And I love the loquat tree too. That's behind the focal pot. There's a loquat tree that's in the Areobatria japonica. It's in the back corner on the right. That tree is really neat too. I bought it as a little tiny stick, and it's going to be, I think it matures at 30, but the leaves are just beautiful. They're just very, very tropical. I can use them to make tea, which is really wonderful. Nice.
Yeah.
Good for immune system.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could go on and on.
Well, there's one other thing that was so fun about your yard, and that was your window wells. And I thought they were so creative and so fun. I wonder if you could just tell us, little stories about the window wells that are around your house. Because, I mean, talk about taking advantage of all the space you can. That was very clever, and they're just really fun.
Yeah, so I was getting my garden ready for 2 garden tours, and I had done small garden tours with like students and, smaller groups, but I had never done, the whatever 500 people type of garden tour. And so I was going around my yard and I was looking at all the spaces, and I just kept going down the side yards and just grimacing at the 5/8 inch minus compacted gravel that was in the window wells that everyone has. And
Mhm.
I just thought, why don't I just there's no avoiding seeing these spaces. Why don't I put something just interesting in there? And the one of the window wells already had seeded with the baby tears, and so that was already in there. And I thought, okay, well that looks so much better. I'm just gonna. I had remembered my mother's a fine artist, and she had some arms that were broken from a firing, and she actually had them in her garden at one point, but she couldn't remember where they were, but I remembered where they were. So we actually excavated them and dug them out of the ground, and they were all covered in mud, and she didn't even know they were there. But anyway, I cleaned them off a little bit and put them in one of the window wells, and I thought, okay, I should have this little sort of wand in one hand. So that's just a red stick that I painted. So that was the first one. And then the second one was alongside that same side of the house, and had nothing in it. And I just thought, what materials? And so it came from a materials. That's where it originated. I thought, okay, what pretty thing could I put in there? And then I thought of the glass. And then I thought of the water. I thought, okay, the blue glass can be water. And then I thought, this is like a lap pool. And so then I got the people off the internet,
Oh, yeah, that is
the
fantastic.
swimmers. Yeah. I don't know. So I was like, okay, that's good. I got 2 down. And then there were a couple more to go. There's actually 5 total, and I've got 2 more on the other side of the house. So the third one was this window well that it faces into our TV room downstairs, and it's an egress window, so it's pretty big. And so there, I always knew I wanted to put some kind of a hanging planter. So I went to the same company, Pot Inc. out of Canada, and had them send me some hanging planters, and then I just rigged it up with some drip tubing. And I put some really kind of fun plants in there. There's coleus, there's Plisticum neoblatum, which is Asian saber fern, which is a lovely plant. That's there all year. And then some euonymus, fortunei is also another year-round plant. And then begonias and coleus, which are great. So that's just hanging and facing our window. And then for the last window well, it had this really funny looking vent on it, and it said hot. I just was like, this is my hardest window well. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to put some interesting rocks in there. And so I went all over, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to put these little white rocks in there. I'm not sure what is going to happen in there yet. And then my friend came over, and I said, what does this look like to you? And she said, it looks like rice. And I thought, yes, it's going to be a bento box. My husband was a little queasy about me painting the inside of the well shiny black, so I just left it. But sure enough, and as she said, bento box too, I said, oh yeah, how am I going to find some really good big chopsticks? And she said, well, Lisa, just make them. And I thought, I don't have time to make them. But sure enough, the internet, there's a site, I think it's called something like Everything Big.
Oh my goodness.
And so they had these giant chopsticks. They're like, I think over 5 feet. And so I just put them in there, and I thought, what can survive in a desolate, window well with no irrigation and a hot, heat vent in there. And so I put rosemary in there, and to this day, it's still surviving just fine.
That is amazing.
So that looks like it could be like a seaweed salad in there. So
there you go.
Anyway. But I think people get a kick out of it. It's, it was just like a sort of me in desperation. I have to make this look somewhat appealing. And then it became a fun project, really.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you did a great job. It was excellent.
Thank you, Sherry.
Oh, gosh. Well, I guess we pretty much got through your garden. Did we miss anything that we need to share about your garden?
Nothing too, I think I've been thinking about gardens because I'm getting together another presentation. I kept thinking one thing I've really learned over the past year, and that is that I think, it's focal points to me are becoming more and more important, just as far as they don't have to be fancy, but also to sort of create the idea of the heart of your garden. Like for people to ask, where is the heart of your garden? Because there's usually going to be one place, and it could be where you have seating and dining and entertaining.
Mhm.
Could be like in that general vicinity, but it could be somewhere else. I have a client who has like a focal piece, like a statue that's in memory of his mother, and so they have some really
Mhm.
beautiful stones that lead up to this statue.
Mhm.
Um, so it could be something like that.
Yeah.
I think it's important to find out where you feel like the heart of your garden is, and to sort of really focus on it and
Mhm.
play it up. I
Yeah.
think the focus of my garden is definitely, and I didn't think about it consciously, but it's really my father's mural.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we look at, and it's sort of it is our living area, so we spend a
Mhm.
lot of time on it, and it just is sort of always there looking kind of across at us.
Yeah.
I think that people should think in terms of that, and it won't be, sometimes you won't figure it out for a while, but maybe
Yeah.
leave a space for it.
Sure. Well, that is an excellent thought to end with, I think. We can all think about where the heart of our garden is. So
Yeah.
excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your garden ideas and your garden with us. It was a great tour, and thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sherry. Thanks a lot for having me. This
Sure.
was really fun. It was fun to
Yeah,
go
it
through the garden
was.
again with you.
Yeah, it was really good to see you again, and good to talk about your garden.
Hi, I'm Jack from Garden Gate Magazine. I hope you enjoyed our video. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel and press the bell to get notified each time we upload a new video. You'll get content with useful gardening tips, design ideas, and how-to help for all levels of gardeners. I especially enjoy the garden tours and talks with fellow gardeners across the country. Be sure to follow us on all of our social platforms. You can see the list below. Thanks for watching.